All right, so up next, let's work on the profile page. So that's going to be the first page in the dashboard that will set it up. Effectively, we're shooting for the form with some inputs, and then the moment we submit the form, we'll perform a HTTP request back to our backend. It's going to be a patch request, and we're going to modify some data about the user. So remember, when we sign up, we provide name, last name, as well as email, and we don't provide the location, but by default on the server, so on my backend, I'm adding some kind of value. And if you want to see that value, just navigate back to your application. And I think the fastest one is going to be a local storage. So go there and you'll notice the email, last name, and notice this location. So by default, the server is going to return this my city and of course the name. So in here, in the profile, we can change those values, including the location. And then later, we can attach this location when we add a potential job. So instead of typing each and every time city such and such, city such and such, we can just add the user city. So let's say if I live in Los Angeles, it kind of makes sense that I'm going to be applying for the jobs in the area. So in the LA area. And therefore, we have this feature where we can change this location. It's going to be used when we submit a potential job. Like I said, it's going to be a patch request back to the server. And when the server responds, we're going to update the values. Let's say if I want to change the name, I type here. I'm going to click on Save Changes. That will trigger the patch request. I have success message, which states user updated. And also I can see in my button that the username changed to a new value. And the same goes for the rest of the properties. And of course, I'm not going to showcase them one by one. And as far as the setup, here's what we're shooting for. So in this video, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the page, and then we'll start working on it in the next video. We'll get use state. We'll get form row because we have a bunch of inputs. We're going to get a wrapper for all the styling. And also, we're going to get the use dispatch and use selector. Since, of course, there's going to be a state value that we're going to be looking for, in our case, user. And also, we'll have to create a new function with create async thunk. Because again, there's going to be an HTTP request back to the server. We're updating this with an API, not just some local data. And also a toast, just in case we have some errors. Then we'll grab the ease loading and user. Again, while we're loading, we'll disable the button. And when it comes to the state, by default, I want to go with an object. And these are going to be values that I'm going to set up. So name, email, last name, and location. And I'm going to take them from the user object in my state. Because at this point, my assumption is that the user has logged in. So if we're in a dashboard, we already have access to the user object. Now, I'll still use this optional chaining because initially it is null. So I'll check if there's a name, please get it. If not, then it's going to be an empty string. But again, since this page will be only visible once the user has logged in, then of course, we'll grab those values from the state. And the way the update is going to take place, once we submit the form, we will trigger the patch request. We'll update the user on the server, so on the API, not locally. It will respond. So the server will respond with new updated user object, just like we did when we registered and logged in. And we're going to set up that new user object equal to our user in the user slice. And everywhere where we access the user values, like the button, for example, and for inputs, the new values will be displayed. Then after that, let's keep moving. We have handle submit. For now, we'll just check for the empty values. So name, email, blah, 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 toast error, please fill out all the values and then return. Because eventually, after the if condition will actually set up that request. We'll dispatch it. And we'll also set up handle change. So since we have like 4 inputs, it kind of makes sense if we just group them all together. So there's going to be a handle change that's going to be looking for the event object, and that's the one that will pass into the form row. Now from the event, we'll grab name and value, and again, we'll invoke set user data ... So copy all the values and then just update that one specific one. So when I type the email field, it's going to update the email value in the state. And therefore in here, again, we have the name, and that name needs to match exactly to whatever value we have in the state. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense. So if the value is name, then the name for that attribute needs to be exactly the same. And this is also going to be the first time where we'll implement that label text. Remember when we set up the form row, we added that label text. And now you see perfectly why we need that. Because if I pass here the name equals to a last name, this is going to be displayed in my label. So again, let's take a look at the form row. At the moment, I'm grabbing the name and I'm displaying it over here. However, this is camel case. So it kind of makes sense that we set up a separate prop and I say, look, this is what I want to display. And that's why we call this label text. So of course, before we continue in the form row, we'll say if there is a label text, please use that. If not, then use the name. Again, we'll use the OR operator. Let's keep on moving. And then all the way in the bottom, we'll have the button to submit the form. Again, like I said, we're going to check for is loading. We'll set it equal to disabled. So while we are loading, while we're in the middle of request, the user cannot submit. We'll also display the text based on that. And that should do it for the original setup. And then, of course, we'll make things more interesting. We'll set up the HTTP requests and rest of the cool stuff. So let's start setting up the profile page. I'll grab these imports right away so we don't need to tape them out. And as a quick side note, if you're wondering why we have here this dashboard form page as far as the wrappers, because I combined the wrapper for multiple pages. See, if you take a look at the project, you'll notice that add job and profile are pretty similar. I mean, there's just a form with a bunch of inputs. And therefore, instead of creating 2 wrappers, I just went with 1. And as a result, I have the styles for both pages in one place. So let's copy this one. Again, there's no point to type this one out. And we're looking for a dashboard, more specifically profile. Let's copy and paste. And as far as the functionality, let's start by grabbing is loading and user. So is loading and then user. And that one is coming from use selector. We want to pass in the store. And then more specifically, we want to look for store and user. Let's save this. And let's also set up the dispatch. Dispatch is equal to, and by the way, I need to add const here, of course, then use dispatch. Let's invoke that. And let's set up that user data. Again, I just find it more convenient if we set this one up as a object, because that way we can keep that handle change in one place and then just update specific value in the object. So let's go here with const, then user data. Then we want to go with set user data. And then that one will be equal to use state. And let's set up the object right from the get-go. We'll say name is equal to, then user question mark dot. So optional chaining and then name. Or if it's invalid, then we go with OR operator. And as a side note, I think I'll have to go back to the README and fix it. See, that's what happens when you set up the README separately here. So let me go here, and these should be OR operators. Now, of course, again, in your case, you already have the correct setup. So let me go back to my profile one. I want to add a comma, and then let's copy and paste right away. And we just need to change these values around. And basically, they match exactly what we have in a state. So let's go back and just double check, just so you don't think that I'm cheating. So if I navigate here, I have the Redux I have the user, and at the moment I'm looking for pending action. So let me actually look at the last one. And then in here, we'll be able to see the email, last name, location, and name. So these are all the values that we want in the profile one. And then the token one we'll use when we make this request. And I'm going to talk about it in way greater detail later, so I'm going to skip it for now. So let's navigate back here. And again, we want to set the property equal to whatever is the state value. So second one will be email. Then the third one, I believe it's a last name. And then we have the location here. So let's change this one around. Then we want to right away set up the handle submit, where we'll check for those empty values. And also we will eventually submit the request. So let's go here with const handle and then submit. Now in here, we'll be looking for the event because we want to prevent the default. Prevent default, let's invoke that. And then let's set up the condition right away. So if no name or, and then rest of the values. So if no email, if no last name, or if no location. If one of them is missing, then basically let's set up the toast. So let's say here toast error. And as far as the values, let's just go with please fill out all fields. And as I said, this is a very, very nifty extension for people like me who always make some kind of spelling errors. And the extension that I'm talking about is this one, code spell, I think checker. Yeah, that's the one. It's an awesome extension. It really has saved me a lot of times. And essentially it's just looking for the errors and displays that blue squiggly line. So please fill out all fields. Tiny side note, but very important for me at least. And then let's keep on moving. And now let's set up that handle change, the one that will pass into the form. What was the name? Form row. So let's go here with const and then handle change. Let's go back to all the files. So handle change. And in here again, we're looking for the event object. We'll right away set it up with name and value, just like we were doing as a side note in the register. I'm pretty sure it was exactly the same setup. So if you want, you can copy that one. Now I'll type this one out. But again, we're looking for name, value, and then we just want to dynamically update. So let's just set it up as const name, then event.target name, copy and paste. And if you're wondering why I prefer setting up as a separate variable, simply because when I'm recording, I think it's a bit more explicit what's happening. Otherwise, if I just type here event.target, I mean, some students are confused about it, understandably so. And yes, when I usually make my own applications, I don't do that. But when I'm recording, I think it's a must. So everyone is on the same page. So let's go here with the object. Again, we want to copy first the user and data. Let me just double check. Is it there? No, it's user date, of course. That's why there's an error. So user data. And then we want to go with name is equal to a value. So that's about it for the function. So now let's just set up that return. First, we want to grab the wrapper. Then we'll set up the form. So let's go with form with the class name of form. We don't want to action since we're handling that with JavaScript. We do want to set up the on submit. And in here, let's just go with handle and submit. That's the function name. Then we're going to go with heading 3 and we'll pass in the profile. And after the heading 3, we're going to go with div with the class of form center. And inside of this one, we'll set up those form rows and one by one fill out the values. So let's start first with the name one. So form row, now type will be equal to text. And I'm actually going to slow down right now just so I don't make some silly mistakes. So then name is equal to name. Like I said, it needs to match whatever we have in the state. It's very, very important. Now the value is equal to an actual state value. And this is the case where, of course, I need to look for the user data first, unless we destructure it. So I think I'm going to go here with user data and then dot and name. And lastly, we want to grab the handle change. And yes, it looks like I need to update this one in the README as well. So let me go here with handle change is equal to, let's close the form row. That's our first one. And before we continue, let me quickly swing back to the README. Again, your README is going to be correct already, don't worry. So username, user data dot name, user data dot last name, user data dot email, and then user data dot location. And back in the profile, let's copy and paste. If you want, you can set up the comments, but in my case, I won't do that. We want to copy this 3 times and we just need to change the values. So for the second one, type will be still text. However, the name will be last name. And first, let me just enter that and then you'll see where is the issue. And then we'll set up the label text. As far as the value, it's going to be equal to a last name. And then handle change stays the same. That's the reason why we set it up. For the email, we're going to go with type email, name email, and value email. So all of these 3 will change. And then for the last one, it's going to be text input. But of course, these 2 will be locations. So let me target both of them. And let's just type location. And it looks like we have an issue. So let me double check. Let me scroll up. Oh yeah, in here. So prior to recording the video, I actually switched the code. So that's why there are a few bugs over here. So you know what? Let's do it this way. Const, and then let me grab all of them. So I'm going to take the name, email, last name, and also location, and I'll set it equal to user and then data. Basically, I'll destructure it from this state. And now let me add that line of code here as well. So let me go back, and then in the README, let me add so there is no issue, like so. So now everything should be working. Yep, we correctly have all the values. Like I said, by default, server is going to set up location as my city. So once we change this value, then of course it's going to be updated here as well. And then when we add the job, it's always going to be the user's location. And as far as the label text, notice, so I'm displaying last name. So it kind of makes sense if we set up a separate prop there, which we already have. We just need to implement it. So let me go to form row. I'm looking for label text. And in here, let's type label text or name. So if the label text is present, then use that. If not, then name. And now back in the profile one, where we have the last name over here, we can go with label text and let's just decide what we want to display. So in my case, it's going to be last name, like so. So not camel case, just a regular text. And last thing we want to add here, still within the div. So please don't place it outside. It still needs to be in the form center. We want to set up that button. We want to go here, button submit. And we're going to set up some classes here as well. So class name and then btn block. And also let's disable the button while we're loading. So disabled equals to is loading. So if it's true, then the button is disabled. If we're done with the request, and of course we can use the button again. Now we also want to set up the expression over here where depending on is loading value, will display different text. Again, ternary operator will say if the loading is true, text will be please wait ... Now if it's false, then we'll just say save changes. Let's save it. This is going to be the look of our profile page. So now let's start setting up the functionality. All right, so we're done with UI. Now let's talk logic. And like I have been repeating over and over and over again, we will make a fetch request. So these updates will happen on the server. It's not just some local data that we'll be updating. We'll be updating some values on the server. The endpoint is auth update user plus the root URL, of course. The method is patch. And these are the values that server expects. So we need to provide everything. Even though we might be updating just one value, the server is looking for all of them, for the email, name, last name, as well as the location. Now, what's also very, very important is that we pass in the authorization header, because let's think about it. So Peter or John or whoever has logged in, only he or she should be able to update those values. So you don't want some random person to log in and then just start updating someone else's profile, correct? Now, how do we restrict that access? Well, that's where that token comes into play. Remember, every time we log in or register, we're getting back this token, the one that is saved here in the local storage. So that's the one that we need to attach to the request. And then the server knows, hey, this is such and such user, and we're updating these values. And if there's something wrong with this token, or if it's not present, then server sends back 401, the status code 401, which means unauthorized. So I'm not allowed to access, for example, Peter's account, or Susan is not allowed to access Anna's account. And hopefully you see where I'm going with this. And the way we structure such request, basically, now we're accessing a restricted resource on the server. So similarly, how we have restricted pages, let's say, on a front end, now we have restricted resource on the server. And in order to access that, we need to use authorization header. And it has a very specific syntax where we go with first bearer. Yes, needs to match to the T. And then space and token. So server is going to be looking for all of these things. Whether we have authorization header, whether we have here the name bearer at the start, whether we have the space, and then the token. And if someone has tampered with the token or the token has expired, and as a side note, I set the expiration for 1 day. So token will be valid for 1 day, or the token is not present. Then server sends back the error. Now, I'll discuss the nitty-gritty of setting up such request in the following video when we go with update user, where basically we set up the create async thunk and all of that. For now, I just want to showcase how it's going to look like as far as the browser. So I'm going to navigate to the complete application, and I want to open up the network tab, and I'll just change the location value. Again, you can change any of them. Just keep in mind that if you change the email, of course, when you log in, you'll also have to change this email. And yes, this will also check for those duplicate values. So let's say if I try to do it here with John12, notice right now we'll have email field has to be unique, because while I was recording, I already set up an account with this email. This is just a tiny side note. Now, my main point here is to showcase how the request is going to look like. So let me go back and let me just change my location to, let's say, LA. Once I submit, notice that we make another request, update user, and the status in this case is 200. So we successfully updated this value. So if I'll take a look at the Redux tools, I'll see that I have a user object in there. And then, of course, the location value now is the Los Angeles. And that's the one that we'll use in the add job as well. Now, more importantly, let's just dissect this request. First of all, request URL. Like I have been harping over and over again. This is the URL. And then notice the specific endpoint. So we have root URL and then auth updated user. So root URL, whatever it is, in this case, it's this one, and then / auth and updated user. Now, what is the method? It is patch. And like I have been saying, if you'll set up a GET request to this particular route, it's not going to work because server is expecting a HTTP method by the name of patch. Now, status code 200 means that we have been successful. That's why we get back okay. And if you'll take a look at the previous one, you'll see that it is 400, which means a bad request. And then let's keep on scrolling. We're looking for request headers. And now notice we have here this authorization header. with the value of bearer and then the token value. And this is going to be the only way how I'll be able to set up the requests in dashboard. Please keep in mind, whether we are adding the job, editing the job, deleting the job, looking at all the jobs, getting the stats, all of that info belongs to this one user. And that is by design. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense if somebody just can come in here and start tampering with the values. Hopefully it's clear, and then in the following video, we'll start setting up the request in the user slice. Okay, and once we're familiar with the request, we'll have to set up. Now let's see how the code is going to look like. So we're going to use, again, create a sync thunk. Since this is a synchronous action, we'll have to provide the name for the action. In my case, it's going to be user, update user. Of course, we export, and we're going to be looking for the user value, essentially the entire object that we set up in the profile, as well as the thunk API. Now, when it comes to the actual request, we'll use custom fetch. We'll use batch method, since it will allow us to set up the HTTP method with the value of batch. And the endpoint is auth and update user. So we already have the root one. So now we're just adding the specific one at the end. We'll provide the user. And if you remember the Axios tutorial section, we can also pass in the options as the third argument in the batch method. And in here, we want to provide headers, and more specifically, we want to provide authorization header. So this will make sure that we have proper syntax. So then we want to type bearer. Again, that is requested by the server. And as far as the token, well, we can use thunk API. We can get the entire state of our application with get state. Then user, since that is the name of our slice, user, since that's the property that we have in a state, and then more specifically, token. So thunk API, get state, user, and get token. Now, if we're successful, we want to return the data, and then we'll do something with it in our extra reducers. However, if there is an error, I want to log, just because we'll talk about the logout in the next video. So I'll log error.response, but this is technically optional. And we also want to return the error message, like you just saw in the previous video, where, for example, if we're trying to update a user with existing email, then we get that error message. So again, we pass in error.response, data, and message. Now, as far as the extra reducers, here's what we want to do. We want to go with user. So we want to grab the new user that we're getting back from this server. It's going to be located in the payload. We want to set isLoading equal to false. And we want to update right now the new user, because keep in mind, we updated those properties. For example, name. And we also want to add the user to the local storage, because we want to keep that data when we refresh the page or when the user comes back. And we'll also set up the toast. We'll say, okay, you successfully update the user. Now, if there's some error, again, we just set up loading equal to false and toast error, and then pass in the payload. Then in the profile, we want to import update user, and then we want to dispatch it. So if one of the values is missing, then of course we display this error. However, if everything is correct, we go with dispatch update user. And in this case, I'm going one by one, but keep in mind that we can also grab all of the values from the state. And as so, now let me fix this README as well. So I have profile somewhere here. Let me grab the data. Remember, we destructured that data here. Let me copy and paste, and now everything is going to make sense. I guess let's start where? In the user slice. So let's scroll up. We want to set up that function. I guess I'm going to do it right after that. As a quick side note, yes, in 2 videos, Basically, in the next video, I'll talk about the logout feature that we can optionally add. And then right after that, we'll talk about refactoring. Effectively, how we can refactor the user slice so we have less code here. So all of that is coming up. Let's start first by creating that function. I'll call this update and then user. And we're going to go with create async thunk. Remember, first we need to provide the action name, user, and update. User, then comma, and then let's set up that function. It's going to be a sync function. We will invoke it, and we're looking, and as I said, no, this is not an object, my bad. For some reason, I got carried away. That's for create slice. In here, we just need to pass in two things, the action as well as the function. Now, in the function, let's set up the user. So that's what we were going to be passing from the profile page and the thunk API. So those are the two things we need. Now, I think I'm just going to grab this try and catch because it's going to be faster. So try and catch here. Custom fetch, yep, that is still the case. However, the method is different. Now we're looking for the batch. Then when it comes to the URL, we want to go with auth. So /auth and then update user. User, again, is being passed here from the profile. So I'm just going to leave that one as it is. And then let's set up those options. We'll start here with headers. Again, we cover that in a great detail in the Axios tutorial section. But then authorization. So authorization header, then bearer. And now we want to set up that token. So let's set up the interpolation. Let's look for thunk API, then get state. So now we get the entire state of our application, user, so slice name, then property name, and then the token. And if we're successful, we're going to get back the data. And if there is an error, let's just log the error, then a response. Let's save this and then let's keep on scrolling. And if you take a look at the README in the extra reducers, it's pretty much the same as the login one and register one when it comes to fulfilled. So I think I'm just going to copy and paste in this case. So let me keep on moving. Where's the fulfilled one? Or you know what? Login is the last one. So we can copy these ones. Let's copy and paste. We just want to update, of course, the value here. Let's say update user. When the request is in progress, we want to set up is loading to true. We're loading. Then if everything's correct, we want to get back the user, set is loading to false, set state is user, and also update the local storage. The only thing we'll change here is user updated. Basically, that's going to be our message. Let's add exclamation point. And as far as the reject, yep, same deal, toast error and all that. Now let's just navigate to profile, right? Let's grab that and you know what? Let me use the auto import again. So we'll go with dispatch since that's what we set up. And then let's go with update user. And we want to pass in, of course, the state, basically the user. And that one is located in the user data. Or you can pass one by one, just like I have in the README. So let's try it out once we have everything in place. At the moment I have my city. So let's change this one around to something. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. Let's save it. Yep, we have user updated. And now notice how this value is persisted. Basically, now we're getting that from the user. And I can definitely showcase that if I change my name. So we'll go here with Peter. And voila, we have Peter in our button as well. Now let's try to update with some kind of ID that is in the database. And I know for sure that this one is because I already set this one up. And in this case, we have email field has to be unique. So with this in place, we're actually done with this particular page. Yes, there are a few features coming up in the following videos, but as far as the main logic, we are done. So if the user comes here, changes some values, as long as they're provided, he or she is going to be in good shape. and we'll be able to update the values as far as the profile is concerned. So if you want to change the email, change the last name, location, and all that, just navigate to the profile page and update these values. And lastly, I just want to showcase what the server is returning. So let me go to the network. Let me change it to, I don't know, whatever, my city here. Just to showcase what response we're getting back since we're not logging. And in here, again, I have the error, of course, because I didn't change the email. So let me go here. Yep. We update the user. And if we take a look at the response, so this is what the server is sending back. We get back, again, the user object, then whatever the values as well as the token. So now, again, we're using this token to make the upcoming requests. If you're curious, the official name of this token is JSON Web Token, or JWT for short. And it's a very common and popular option when it comes to authentications. We cover it in way greater detail in my Node course, since in there we actually set one up on a server from the scratch. But as far as the front end is concerned, you can think of this as a secret key that has the information about the user, and the only way to access, create, modify the restricted data, so the data that belongs to the user on the server, is by providing a valid JSON Web Token, which we store in our app when the user logs in or registers. We're technically done with the profile page, but there's something that I want to point out. You see, if we'll make some kind of request that is just bad request, then we'll get back 400. Let's say in our case, that is the already existing email. So if I'm going to go here, and if I'll send the request, I'm going to get back 400. So that is one type of error that we can get back from the server. But what we need to keep in mind is that when we have the resources that have restricted access, we also get back 401, which means that we're not authorized to access this resource. And in order to showcase that in action, if you want to follow along, you can also do that. You need to go to authorization, basically to update user, and comment this one out, because of course eventually we'll set this one back as it is, but just pass in authorization equal to bearer. Effectively, don't pass in the token. So let me try to set that one up, where again, I'm going to use this in a second anyway. So let me just comment this one out, and then instead of looking for the Thunk API, I'm just going to pass in nothing. And now let me go back to the browser, and let me try to change the value. So let's say in this case, I'm going to go for location. I'm going to say here something, whatever. I mean, it's not going to work. My main point is that we're getting back 401, authentication invalid, and that is totally different than 400. So when it comes to 400, that means bad request. That means that we can fix this error on the front end and then send a proper request. When it comes to 401, that means that we have no access to the resource. So here's the $1 million question. Should the user that's not allowed to access this resource be even allowed to see this page? What I'm trying to say is this is optional. Technically, you don't have to do that. But in my case, I'll set up a logout if it's 401. So if there's any issue with the token in any of these pages, if in any of these pages there's going to be 401, I'll immediately log out the user. Again, this is optional. You can make an argument that maybe there's some error code in the profile one, and maybe the add job works and all that. And yeah, that might be the case. Something doesn't work here, so you can just leave the user on this page. But again, the question is, why would you want to do that then? Since the user is not going to be able to update anything anyway. So at least in my case, I'm going to set up a logout if there is 401. And again, I'm going to repeat in all the upcoming requests. I'll do the same thing. So if the error status code is going to be 401, I'll immediately log out the user. But like I keep repeating, technically this is optional. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. You can just say, okay, maybe there's error in this page, so I'll just leave the user here, and then he or she can visit the rest of the pages. And in order to set up the logout, here's what we need to do. First of all, let me remove that dummy code. And then if we take a look at the README, keep on scrolling, the reason why we're logging these responses is because we can see the status. So let's go to the console, and yep, I'll need to do that one more time. So yeah, my bad. User slice. Let's see. For now, let me just remove this one so you can see. Then let's try to make that request against something. And we'll basically see that giant object in there. And in here we have that status property. And the value is 401. So what we're going to do, at least I'm going to do that, in the catch one, I'll check for the particular status. If it's 401, then let's use Thunk API and dispatch logout user, a reducer we already have. And also let's pass in a different message. Let's say return. So that means we were not going to read the following code if we hit this condition. We'll say Thunk API reject with value, and we'll say unauthorized logging out. And then of course we'll log out the user. So let's go to the catch in this case, and let's check for that error here. So let's say if error, and let me see, yep, everything's correct. Usually I forget if I change something, and then of course stuff doesn't work. So let's say here error, then response, and we're looking for a status property, and if it's equal to 401, then we have authentication error. And that means that I'm going to go with Thunk API dispatch. And what we want to dispatch logout user, a reducer we already have in our user slice. And let's also set up an error message. And in this case, I'm going to go with a string, and I'll say unauthorized logging out. And in order to test this, I'll have to remove that token one more time. So let me cut this one out. Of course, I'll add it once we're done. And let's see what results we're going to get. So in the location, I'll type whatever gibberish. Let's click, and notice now we have unauthorized logging out. And of course, in the console, we can see the 401 message. So now let me just add the token. And now we can talk about the refactoring. Okay, now we're completely done with our profile page. And before we move on to the add job page, let's also talk about the refactoring. At the moment, if you take a look at our user slice, it is getting quite busy. Not only we have all of the imports, the states, the extra reducers, but we also have these somewhat massive create async thunk functions, where we have these try and catches. And the question is, well, can we move this logic to a separate file and then have a little bit cleaner appearance? And the answer is yes. We just need to set up a separate file. We need to import some things like custom fetch and also some action creators that we're going to use. In this case, logout user, but then once we set up add job, there's actually going to be one more. And then move this try catch logic into the separate file. So yes, of course, we'll have to set up a separate function and then just invoke this function and pass in whatever values. Now, if you take a look at the README in the user slice, basically I'll create user thunk. And in there, like I said, we'll import two things, custom fetch and logout user, since we have no access to the logout user in the thunk one. And let's set up those functions. Basically, I kept the same name. I just added thunk. And this function is going to be looking for three things: the URL, user, thunk API. Then we'll set up try catch. We invoke custom fetch, again, that we're importing. And basically, the reason why we need that is because of that base URL. And then we add whatever method. So again, this logic did not change. The only difference is that we're just passing in here the URL and then the user. Both of those things now we're getting from the function parameter. And also, since we want to invoke that thunk API, we also need to pass this in. And as a result, take a look at our user slice. It's going to look something like this. And actually, we can remove this async even if you want. This part doesn't really matter because this one will return a promise. It's going to be a sync function anyway. We pass in the URL, we pass in the user, and we pass in the thunk API. And our code in the user slice is much cleaner. Again, this is optional. Technically, if you want to keep those functions as they are right now, you don't have to refactor anything. But in my case, I will. So first, I guess let's create that file. I'll call this user thunk.js. As far as the imports, we're going to be looking for, and as I said, I'll add here a import for the random React icon that I don't need. What I need here is custom fetch. And also, let's right away get that logout user from the user slice, since we have no access to it in this file. Then let's create the function. And I guess I'm going to start with that register user thunk. So export const register user and thunk. Now it's going to be a synchronous function since we'll have await, and it's going to be looking for URL, user, and thunk API. Now, as far as the function logic, we just need to swing back to the user slice and take everything starting with try and ending with a catch. So let's take this one out. Back in user thunk, copy and paste. And just change the URL to a parameter. That's it. Now what we want to do in the user slice, import the function. So let me do that right after my local storage stuff. I'm going to say import, and you know what, actually I can just probably invoke it, and auto import will take care of that. We're going to go here with return. We do need to return that. And then we'll say register user thunk, and let's pass in those values. As far as the URL, remember that was auth and register. And as a quick side note, if you don't want to pass URL, you don't have to. So technically, we already have the custom fetch here. If you want to keep it like we already have in the user slice, you can do it. In this case, I'm just showcasing that. Of course, we can also pass this as a parameter. Let's pass in the user, and definitely we need to pass in the thunk API. Otherwise, the logic is not going to work. And effectively, we just need to repeat this with the rest of the functions that we have. So login user as well as the update user. So let's do that in the user thunk. I think I'm going to do it exactly the same way. So export const and then login user thunk. It's going to be a sync function. We'll look for URL, user, and thunk API. As far as the logic, we'll just take it out of the login user. So try catch thunk API, copy and paste. Let's change the URL here. And we're already exporting, so we just need to go back here. Let's say login user thunk. And let's pass in the URL again, which is going to be auth, login, then user, and then thunk API. All these three things. And then lastly, we have update user, which has even more code. So let's try to set this one up. I think I'll copy and paste these values. Let me just close the curlies here. And let's say update user thunk. Let's grab the functionality like so. And what do we need to do? Copy and paste. I mean, in the wrong spot, but okay, good enough. As far as the URL, let's pass it here, URL, and then let's return update user thunk. The URL is going to be auth update user, then user, and then thunk API. Let's save it here. Let's save it here as well. Since we have access to the logout user, we should be good. There should be no surprises. And I'm just going to test it out with login functionality. If that works, then everything else should work as well. So let me go here with john12@gmail.com. And let's pass in the password. And let's see. Yep, we have welcome back, Peter. And now let's navigate to a profile and let's change the name to John, maybe Smith. And then as far as the location, okay, so we have that. And let's save the changes. Yep, we have user updated. And then if I take a look at my store, I have somewhere here user updated fulfilled. We have the user in the state, and it looks like it matches the values that I just provided. And also the same goes for the local storage. And with this in place, now we can start working on the add job page.